we often live our lives with blinders when we just have certain patterns that we fall into. And food is one of those.
Kids watch what you're doing much more carefully than what they listen to. So if you sit down with them and you normalize those foods and you eat those foods from their youngest remembrance, then it's not weird to them.
I'm Naomi Hallum, a mother, long-term vegan, and someone who loves learning from others. I've gathered some of my favourite vegan parents, a mixture of advocates, activists, health professionals, chefs, and more, to talk about the benefits and misconceptions around vegan parenting, which are many. We'll also be talking about all the fun and not so fun stuff that we parents go through and how raising kids has shaped us. Whether you're curious about vegan parenting or just want to know where we get our protein, then this podcast is for you. It's a resource I wish I'd had as a first-time mom, but that you'll never have to be without. Welcome to Raising Gen V. Today I'm chatting to two game-changing siblings, parents and food innovators whose plant-based burgers are as incredible as the reasons they have for making them. It wasn't until late in their careers that Todd and Jody Boyman redirected their talents from tech and photography to creating sustainable food products with the power not only to safeguard the planet for their own children, but for all our children. Today, they are proof that it's never too late to do what you love and to leave a lasting legacy for the next generation. Let's meet the inspiring siblings and Hungry Planet founders, Jody and Todd. So, siblings, Jody, Todd, you are also connected by founding a business together. Whose idea was it?
Yeah, I think it sprung out from both of us.
Okay.
Right? I think because we've been vegans for so long, Jody largely as an activist, me just as not eating, animal products and trying to avoid wearing them. I think we started with the idea of asking ourselves the question of, could you recreate what everyone loves to eat, which is meat, and could you do it from plants? And it was just a conversation that we had, and we met some like-minded individuals and thought we could make this happen.
So how does somebody go from not being in the plant-based food industry to being in it? Do you start with an interest in food, or are you good in the kitchen, or do you just like to see what you can fashion out of plants? So where does that sort of inspiration come from?
As a longtime activist of many, many decades, it really started as a passion project. And, I don't know really a lot about food. I've been eating plant-based for many, many decades, but food itself isn't so much of a passion for me, but making the world a better place is. And when we started kicking around ideas, I thought, you know what? Food is the biggest common denominator for making change. And to that end, we thought we need to start a business and we need to change people's behavior through their food choices and thus bend the curve on personal and planetary health, which is our mission statement. So we embarked on that journey not knowing a whole bunch about food, and we got educated really fast. And we surrounded ourselves with people who've had decades of experience in the food industry. So we brought the passion and the commitment and the tenacity, and they brought the knowledge and the know-how and helping us with the roadmap of how to put all those pieces together. It was definitely a joint effort.
When we started, truly it was a kind of philanthropic mission that how can we make a difference here? And one of the earliest tests that we did was Santa Barbara Unified School District, where we met Nancy Weiss, who was the director of food service there, not a vegan, not a vegetarian. And Jody sought her out. Nancy tasted the food and she's like, okay, I can't get my head around what I'm tasting. This is just flat out good food. I'd love to serve it to K through 12 in Santa Barbara. And that's about 15,000 students, right? And this was about 7 years ago. People still were like, plant-based meats made from plants. What is that? Are those animals that you're feeding plants to? People had no idea what it was. And Nancy brought this to this community of students and started off with 3 items. By the end of the year, she was doing over 30 items. And we just kept on our commitment to Nancy was, we'll just ship you pallets of food, do whatever you want. She kept on ordering pallet after pallet after pallet. At the end of the year, we said, Nancy, how did this go? Because it was kind of a philanthropic venture as far as we were concerned. Right. And she said, I calculated the total number of meals I served in Santa Barbara Unified School District in the academic year, and I'd served 2 million meals. 1 million of them were Hungry Planet. Not by design, but just the food was really good. So I think, coming back to that question, it started as a passion project, as kind of this mission project. We had tests like that started to demonstrate 7 years ago. This food is really good and it can serve a broad audience. And then it was, okay, we need to figure out how to commercialize this and make it money at it, because you can give away a lot of food to K-12 school districts and make a lot of difference. But unless you're the federal government, you really can't afford to do that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, making money is still important there. You have to be able to stay afloat. And it's a tough business to be in, because plant-based foods have seen an increase in popularity, but they've also faced a lot of hurdles and struggles as kind of misinformation gets spread about them, which you may know a lot about. So I'm sure I know the answer to this already, but has it been an easy ride, or has it been really, really hard?
Yeah, it's been a lot more difficult, I think, than we thought it was going to be. Again, not coming from the food industry and having no idea kind of this irrational exuberance that would build around this category, where it seemed like during a 24-month period, about 4 years ago, every other day there was a new plant-based meat company getting launched, right? So a lot of people, I think, opportunistically thinking this is a gold rush, let me get into it. Most of them also didn't know anything about the food industry. They probably for the most part weren't necessarily ethically aligned. They just saw entrepreneurially, this is an interesting category. And the numbers are that there were over 1,000 plant-based meat companies launched over about 24-month period. So that creates a really chaotic, very noisy environment. And on one hand, it was good because it was in the press all the time. So when Jody was out making our earliest sales 7, 8 years ago, people be, okay, I have no idea what you're talking about. Now everybody knows what we're talking about. So that's huge, right? I mean, that was a multi-billion-dollar lift by all these companies and all these VCs to educate the market. But now it's kind of calmed down because a lot of the food was rushed to market. The formulas that we developed had been under development for 20 years. So we knew that the food was really good. We had certified master chefs on it. So yeah, there was a lot of noise. There was a lot of difficulty. That noise has died down, but there's an education that lasts. And people now are looking for really good food. And so when they taste our food, more often than not, the reaction is, okay, so who are you and where have you been? And so we're in wonderful universities like Harvard University. We're in Legoland. We provide the U.S. military. We're in some wonderful venues making a difference because our focus has always been on spectacular food. And just being patient, right? Making sure that we weren't, kind of this flashing star, but we really wanted to make a difference for the long term.
It's so important, though, is it's got to taste good. It's simply that. It's got to be good. People have got to like it enough, not just to say, yeah, that's a decent replica for a beef burger. They have to say, that's amazing. That's so good. I want to know when I can have it again.
Yeah. It's that, but it's also demonstrably better nutritionals, and I think a lot of those early products that came to market were not very nutritious. They were loaded with saturated fat like conventional meat is. Ours has 0. We have 10 ingredients. Others have 20, 25, 30 ingredients in theirs. So it has to be absolutely mouthwatering delicious. You got to have it again. It has to be demonstrably nutritious, and it has to be so much better for the environment. And I think especially with younger people, if you can show them the metrics about the plant-based meats that they're eating, and in our case, our meats save 90% on CO2, 90% on fresh water, and 75% on land. That's a win-win, So you get something that's great tasting, great for the environment, and of course, you're cutting down on all the animals that are having to be killed to be eaten.
Right.
Which, as we know, is about 80 billion or more terrestrial animals a year, never mind all the aquatic ones. So we're really trying to see how can we reduce that number. I mean, we're not even feeding 8 billion people right now. People are starving globally with 80 billion animals that we're killing per year. So how do we up that nutrition game and take less of a toll on our environment and our health and the animals themselves?
So let's talk about the name, Hungry Planet. To me, that says you want to feed people, but also that you care about how you do it and respecting the world around us. Is that kind of along the lines of why you picked that name?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we were looking for something that wasn't necessarily focused on plant-based meats. So it's not Hungry Planet meats, right? It's how do you feed, how do you nourish the planet? How do you feed and nourish and regenerate the human body with really healthy, delightful food? And I think when you look at these issues that we're talking about, when Jody and I first started eating vegan, and Jody before I did, I was the slow learner in the family. The data was out there and it was compelling, but with social media and our ability to collect and crunch and analyze data, it's absolutely overwhelming today, right? I mean, it's impossible not to understand these existential problems that we're facing. And so we just wanted to kind of acknowledge that we are trying to feed a hungry planet. And when you look at some of the most recent data, I think recently The Economist and Bank of America came out with a report that stated that in the next 40 years, as a planet, we're going to have to produce more food in the next 40 years than we have consumed collectively over the past 10,000 years. Let that sink in for a minute. That's extraordinary. In 40 years, the next 40 years, we need to produce more food than we have produced and consumed in the past 10,000 years total.
You know, I think when we were growing up, our mother is Swiss, and she just thought, this is what the federal government is telling me, right? The standard American diet is I give you 4 ounces of meat and we put everything else around the side. And I would just push everything away and not eat that pork chop. And my sister would put it in her mouth and go to the bathroom and spit it out in the toilet. You know, like we were revolting from a very young age, and she just couldn't figure out why we would not sit down and eat. She thought she was doing the right thing, right? And most parents raising their kids feel like they're doing the right thing by including all of this conventional meat in their kids' diets, when in fact it's sabotaging our children's health from a very young age. They're starting to find out that kids as young as 8 and 10 have hardening of the arteries and, you know, prediabetes and diabetes in our school systems. And we've never seen that before in previous generations.
So, but just to be clear, Jody and my younger sister, Kim, weren't quite that delicate in refusing to eat these things. It would get served and they would look at my mom and go, so who did this used to be?
So that's very perceptive. Okay, right. So tell me, like, how old were you at this point when you were making these perceptions?
So I think that who did this used to be, staring at the pork chop on my plate, probably started around 10 or 11.
Okay.
And then it was sort of a full court press with my mother, who is very Swiss and very like, this is what you're going to do. And I didn't know any other vegans. I didn't know any other vegetarians. I'm not even sure if the term vegan was invented back then. And we were growing up in the Midwest where everybody ate meat. I was being so rebellious, you know.
Yeah.
And as
do you remember this time? Do you remember?
Oh yeah, it was
Jody being this naughty little girl who wouldn't eat her pork chops.
I was being obstinate.
I'm like, you know, in the U.S., it was always pork chops and applesauce, right? I mean, that was just kind of thing. It was like, yeah, bring it on. I mean, at that age, I had no problem with that. I was like, what's going on with my 2 sisters?
It tastes good. So, and they're being weird.
Yeah.
Right. Which I think, most kids would say.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right? And to this day, still say.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why it's incumbent on us as vegan parents of vegan children to give our kids foods that don't ostracize them.
Right.
Right. And so I had my kids in 2000 and 2002. Back then, there was sort of like the Gen 1 plant-based meats, like the Gardeins and the Morningstar Farms and the Tofurkeys. And a lot of parents were staying away from that. And I thought, there's so many birthday parties they have to go to, and they have to bring their school lunch boxes. And I don't want them to feel like they're on the outside looking in and they're stigmatized. So I would send them with the deli meat, slice sandwiches, and they would go to the birthday parties with their vegan burgers and stuff. And then inevitably other parents and kids would come over and want to know about it, and it would become a topic of conversation and curiosity. And then some mothers would go, well, I'm going to go buy that Morningstar Farm. And
so you would send your kids with kind of like a meat replica so that they felt like they fitted in visually.
Yes, not always, but certainly to birthday parties, which you are raising a 2.5-year-old. Let me tell you, you've got thousands of these ahead of you.
Oh, yeah.
Thousands. And so stock up your freezer, make sure you have the veggie dogs and the veggie burgers and, all of that stuff, because then they can just come in, put it on the grill with everybody else's stuff. You'll have to self-supply usually, although that's changing over the last 2 decades. A lot of parents will now provide that at these gatherings, but we were BYO, bring your own. We would just hike it in and in the lunch boxes, peanut butter and jelly sandwich or hummus and chips. But sometimes it would be, deli slices. Those tofurkey deli slices are fantastic. I still eat them to this day.
It's particularly worrying, isn't it, that not only as a vegan do you have to worry about the food at kids' birthday parties or at the school dinner table, but even just as a health conscious parent, you still have to worry about those things, because the foods associated with kids today are predominantly ultra processed junk foods. I go to the parties and I never see anything, I say living, I don't mean in an animal sense, but fresh, that was grown. It's always very processed. It's very hard to find, a piece of fruit or a nice salad or anything like that. And, I think parents today would argue, well, kids don't like that stuff. But that's a problem. Like surely they could like that stuff if they were introduced to it more often. It's like,
they're not raised with it, right? They're not raised with it. And you have to introduce that level of fun and creativity with kids from the youngest age to eat the rainbow, right?
Right.
Come into the kitchen. Let's play with it. Let's have lots of fruits and lots of veggies. And my kids used to play all the time with me in the kitchen. And also, kids watch what you're doing much more carefully than what they listen to. So if you sit down with them and you normalize those foods and you eat those foods from their youngest remembrance, then it's not weird to them, and then they become very confident in eating those foods, even when they're around kids that are eating this standard American diet full of all this junk. You find that those kids want the grapes and the strawberries and, the carrot sticks and all that stuff. Well, it's very
true. It's this exposure. And I didn't realize this so much until I went and lived in Spain for 8 years. And when I was in Spain, I watched all these kids running around eating olives as if they were candy, right? And I thought a British kid would never run around eating olives. They would be like, ew, olives. So why is it that Spanish kids love eating olives? And it's just, as you say, because they've watched their parents do it, because it's normalized, and therefore, to them, it's a fun food.
Yeah. We used to put them on our fingertips. That's how our mother, so we would walk around with 10 olives and eat them off, and it was a lot of fun. And so I did that with my kids too. So my kids love olives, love them.
So I guess your vegan journey started when you were very young.
Yes.
And yours, Todd, a little bit later?
The trailing sibling.
Yes. How long did it take you to see the light?
A long time.
Well, it's difficult when you have an older sister and a younger sister who kind of, are you're sandwiched in between.
They were both vegans, right? They'd both gone vegan and you were the outlier.
Yeah. And, I'm just the slower learner in the family. And so, I kind of...
It's nice that you can admit that.
You just admit it, right? You roll with it. And it's like, okay.
Have our faults.
But ultimately it was towards my senior year of university.
Okay.
And, my sisters got to the point where I couldn't even vacation with them anymore. I mean, those people who can just be obnoxious and they just kind of hit you over and over again. But this has been going on for close to a decade in my case, right? So eventually I was like, okay, Jody, Kim, make your best argument. Because I like to be somewhat data driven.
Okay.
He's very, very data driven. Very. And you were requesting this information before the internet, before most of the books on veganism.
So now she's dating us, right?
I imagine Jody rose very well to that challenge, though.
Oh, and Kim, our sister.
So between
footnoted and papers and peer reviewed, but it was not easy because it wasn't on the internet. The internet had not.
So I think it was like leading up to a Christmas. It was probably leading up to a Christmas vacation. I was like, I want to hear your best argument before we get together because I don't want to be talking about this over Christmas.
Right.
Let's just enjoy each other's company. Right. And so sure enough, I get bombarded with very well curated arguments in the 3 buckets that you would expect. Right. So there is the environmental element. There is the health element, the human health, and there's the animal welfare. At this point, I'm 21. And so the animal welfare piece, animal agriculture wasn't back then what it is today.
Right.
So it was abhorrent, but it wasn't at the scale that it was today, right?
Right. No way.
So for me, it was kind of like, okay.
Yeah.
But the environmental piece, I was like, wow, that's amazing, right? So the fact that a pound of beef takes 600 gallons of water, that's extraordinary to me.
Right.
I was like, that doesn't compute. So I just checked all those boxes. I said, okay, that makes sense. Here's the problem, gals. I don't like tofu. I don't like veggies.
I hear this a lot, right? So, you think I have to like tofu to be vegan.
Yeah. So what am I going to do?
What are you going to do?
Yeah. So
there's nothing else to eat.
So Kim, who was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, I flew her out to San Diego where my wife and I were living. And I said, what am I going to eat? And so she took me shopping. And back then it was a lot more difficult to figure out, well, how are you going to eat these things? And again, part of the reason for Hungry Planet, right? Let's give people what they love. Let's make it really easy for those who want to lean in. Even if it's just a meal a week, let's make it easy. You don't have to learn new recipes. You don't have to change your palate. Over time, I think what people find is that they use something like Hungry Planet as kind of the gateway to eating differently.
Right.
And then they start realizing, oh my goodness, there are all these other wonderful things that you just hadn't paid any attention to in the shopping aisle because you'd always been conditioned to look for different things.
Right. And it's so true because there's so many foods that I eat now on a daily basis that I'd never eaten at all in my 30 years of life before going vegan.
Right.
Things like kale and nutritional yeast and tofu and making cream sauces out of cashews and so many nice things, right? But I think it's fair to say that it's not easy for everybody. I think if you are someone who is very culinary and you like your veggies and you like all these different foods and flavors and try new things, then it's going to be easier. But if you're someone who has eaten a very certain way for a long period of time, it's not going to be that easy to suddenly go and eat completely differently and also know where to find the ingredients to allow you to do that. So as you say, having that gateway to eat similarly to the way you have done, but in a way that doesn't harm the planet and your own health and animals so much is so important.
Yeah, and I think in our lives, we often live our lives with blinders and we just have certain patterns that we fall into. And food is one of those. I know having been a vegan for about 10 years before the arrival of my first child, as that child grew up in our neighborhood, I had no idea that we actually had McDonald's and Burger Kings around until in 2002, Burger King launched their BK Veggie. I thought, I wonder if we have any of those nearby. Well, sure, we had them all over the place, but I had my blinders on because they didn't have anything for us to eat.
Right.
Yeah.
And my daughter, who at that point I think was about 6 years old, she only knew of Burger King and McDonald's as rest stops when we were driving across country and a place where you had a playground. She had no idea there was really food there because we never ate there. And we took her into Burger King to offer her first BK Veggie. And she was just like, what is this place? I thought it was a rest stop and a play zone to actually serve food because our blinders were on and she just, it wasn't a place that she interacted with. It was funny when she ordered, I'll take a BK Veggie, please. And the woman gave it to her. She goes, I don't eat my animal friends. And the person behind the counter was just like, get out of here, get away from here. So she had a bit of her ants in her, right? She was going to let people know exactly how she felt about her food choices.
Yeah. It's funny. People have said to me in the past, like, oh, you don't eat meat? Like, don't you miss Chick-fil-A? And I'm like, well, I've never eaten in a Chick-fil-A because I haven't eaten chicken in 32 years. Yeah. And so that was before Chick-fil-A was here, right? Or I had access to it. So I know the answer to this already, I think. But when it came to raising your own children, you were already vegans. So was it therefore, I'm guessing, an easy decision to say, I'm going to raise my children vegan as well? Or were you concerned about them being ostracized or, anything like that?
Well, it starts first when you're deciding to have a kid, right? And I decided at 38 to have my first and 40 to have my second. So my healthcare providers who were conventional were like, we're not sure about that. Like, you probably should be drinking dairy. You should probably be eating meat. You're going to be deficient in all of this. And I said, I got this. Like, no problem. Have you seen Dr. Spock's, child and, baby and child book, right? Which sold second only to the Bible in terms of the amount of copies that are out there.
Okay.
And in his 7th edition, before he died at 94, he says, we should all be raising our children plant-based. He used the word vegan because plant-based wasn't coined back when he passed away. And, he's the most famous pediatrician in the world. And to have him come out with that gave me a lot of confidence. And, and then I breastfed each kid for a year each, which helped, I thought, with their immune system and all of that. And so I was fully committed. In fact, I was not going to have children if I wasn't able to raise them 100% plant-based. I was super committed to that. And that's, I think, why I was a fence sitter for so many years, is I thought, what are the pros? What are the cons of having children? Does the planet really need more individuals? Okay, well, I'm going to have them, but they're not going to contribute to the problem and the suffering, right? They're going to come and be ambassadors for change, for the good.
Right.
And, my son is 6'7" and, raised 100% plant-based, and not that height is, the metric for health, but he's certainly, blew through all of his,
well, it certainly debunks the common myth that, vegan children are shorter and stunted in some way.
Exactly. Exactly. He's like my poster child. I just walk down the street with him, vegan. And they're like, ooh, okay.
So you have 2 healthy, grown vegans. How old are they now?
24 and 22.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
Todd, would you?
The younger brother got started a little earlier.
So it's an interesting question, right? Because you wonder how many omnivore couples sit down and say, should we raise our children as omnivores?
Yeah, that
right?
is.
Because that's almost really the question that should be asked. Because when you understand the data, that's where you ought to be thinking, okay, we're about to bring a life onto this planet. What's the best for them? That's probably the time to take a deep breath and go, well, maybe we should be thinking about what we eat.
Right, because I think there must be conversations where parents say, we're going to raise our kid healthily, right? We're going to not allow them to have, I don't know, Coca-Cola until they're 5 or something
and
like
Cheez-Its.
that. Or cigarettes,
And what kind of values do we want our children to grow up with?
Food is an extension of that.
It's a direct reflection of the values that you have.
And food is medicine. I mean, at its most fundamental.
But not recognized so much so.
But it should be. It is absolutely fundamental medicine. Food is medicine. And I say that to my kids all the time.
Yeah, I mean, very clearly, right? I mean, we are fed by food companies that don't pay attention to our health, right? And our health is taken care of by institutions that don't pay attention really to what we eat. So you got a bit of a problem there. And that needs to be fixed, right? Our health institutions need to better help educate people about how your dietary choices make a difference. And our food companies need to not just engineer food so that they're addictive, but so that they actually are helpful to what we do.
Nourishing.
Yeah.
Nourishing.
Yeah. So as a parent, in my case, my wife was also a vegan. So, and we were well versed in the data because, had two sisters.
The formal presentation.
had pounded it into a decade or so earlier. So it wasn't really a conversation. It was like, yeah, this is what you ought to be doing.
And you'd come of it from a sustainability. Well, that had been kind of the most compelling part for you, because I know with Jody, it was very much the ethics. For you initially, at least, it was very much the environmental component of how much more better for the planet it was. Yeah. So is that a key driver making the decision with your children, or?
Well, no, I mean, for us, it wasn't really a decision for the children. It just, that's what you were going to do. So
that's how we ate.
There was never a decision point. It's like, look, kids very naturally are going to eat really whatever you serve them.
Well, yes.
And so that's what they're going to eat. And they also very naturally love animals and plants and nature, right? And so of their own volition, they're not going to say, hey, mom and dad, I've got too many vegetables and tofus and other things. Can I go slaughter a cow today? I mean, that probably isn't going to happen, right?
Probably not.
So as a matter of fact, when Tessa, our youngest, was about 4 and Zoe is a couple of years older, we were on a road trip somewhere, and Tessa just out of the blue said, so is God a vegetarian? Well, what an interesting question from a 4-year-old, right? And without hesitation, Zoe, our eldest, who would have been 7, said, of course God is. Why would she eat her own creations, right? I mean, just the innocence of these young thought thinking, my goodness, we love life, right? We're embracing life. And so I think over time, I've realized as well that, yes, I started, my consciousness was open to it through environmental reasons. But if you really are going to love life, right? And you're going to love your neighbor and you're going to love your human family, you probably ought to extend that to your food choices as well. So the ethical side certainly resonates deeply with me now. It wasn't what got me started, but you can only absorb so much when you are being bombarded with data.
It's exactly
right?
the same with my husband. For him, it was kind of one of those ones where, I do care about animal suffering, but what's really hitting me hard right now is that I wasn't taught this stuff about how food impacts the planet in school. Like, this seems like it should be part of our scientific
curriculum.
education. Yeah, it's so important. And he's very mathematical. So for him, it was, definitely those numbers. And then the ethical stuff kind of came later. But I think everything starts to fall into place, doesn't it? When you redirect and you're on a certain path, other components are allowed in for the first time, and you suddenly see the bigger picture.
Starts to click.
Well, I have to ask, are all of your children still vegan? Are they glad they were raised vegan? What are their thoughts on veganism now?
In our family, it's actually not something that we talk about because it was really not something that we spoke about all that often.
Right.
Because it was just what you ate, right? And I think both of my daughters would kind of look at other people and like, why would they eat that, right? It's just, to them, it was the complete opposite of how most people look at it. For them, it's like, of course, I'm not going to eat animal products. And so I don't even quiz them on it today, what they're doing. I know when we go out to eat, we all eat the same things we always ate before.
Because it's your normal. Yeah.
It's
which
just
is beautiful.
It's the normal piece of what they do. And I think there was always that question of, when they go off to university, are they going to find that their way to rebel is to say, hey, mom, dad, let's go, welcome to town. Let's go to a steakhouse. That didn't happen, right? They rebelled in different ways, and we got through that.
Oh, yeah.
But,
They will. They will.
Buckle up.
Buckle up.
It's coming.
It does happen. But they didn't choose food because I think for them it was just so natural. It was like, okay. And quite frankly, as parents, we kind of look at it and go, all right, well, if that's what you're going to do, go for it. But they kind of realize that would be a silly thing to rebel against.
Right. You've got to want to rebel in that direction. You've got to be intrigued by it for sure.
Yeah.
I know loads of parents that have raised vegan children who have just never had that interest.
Yeah.
And then there's others that do have the interest, right? And it's just a different person. We're all just different people taking different paths.
And I think probably as a parent, the question of are they still vegan isn't so much of even a question or concern that we have internally, but it's more the values that were instilled in them by eating that way and truly having, a love for the planet and for their fellow human beings has been reflected in what they have chosen to do. And so for me, it's much less about what are they eating and what are they doing. And what they're doing with their life, isn't selfish. It's trying to find ways to give back and to bless others.
Right.
And so for me, that's kind of the proof, right? So I think by making these choices and working with children at a young age, it helps encourage so many things that leads to a really productive, giving life.
It's empowering, isn't it? I would say it's empowering to know that the choices you make can make a difference, particularly in relation to things that you care about.
Yes.
And I think we've realized in some cases collectively as a society that, if we care about our health, we probably shouldn't eat the donut. And I think that goes through almost everybody's minds when they see something like a cake on the table. They'll think, oh, do I want it enough to embrace the the health kind of hit that will come with this.
Right.
And we've done it with cigarettes now and drugs. We look at them and think, is it worth what it's going to do to our health? And most times we will say no. But we're not critically thinking as much with animal products and thinking, is this product worth the suffering it caused, the health implications, and, the impact on the environment, not to mention everything else. So yeah, I think if critical thinking is so important, if we can encourage people to think critically, that's a huge step, because then at least those that do choose to still eat animal products, they're doing so with the knowledge of what the consequences are. And if they say, that's fine, those consequences don't bother me, then okay, that's your choice. But I think it's the lack of understanding.
It's not a victimless choice.
This is true.
So from the ethical point of view, people always say, it's my choice. And I'm like, fine, but it is not a victimless choice. So think about that. And just to really challenge that cognitive dissonance that happens with people all the time in this sphere, and starting with young kids before that cognitive dissonance dials in,
right,
and allowing them to hang on to that sense of empathy and compassion for all animals from a young age, and moving forward in life with that still firm in their hearts instead of having that being dug out. And I think that's the key, is that we as parents need to protect our kids that way and say, you don't need to split that way. Pet the dog, eat the cow. We are animals.
We are.
And most of us don't see ourselves that way. We see ourselves at the top of this pyramid, right? Instead of in a circle, right? So it's ego and then all these animals around, rather than let's all increase that circle of compassion. And we're part of this. We are nature. We are animals. Yeah. We're not separate. And we're all going to go down if we don't take care of our environment.
Jody, how do your kids feel about you? If I was to ask your children to describe their mom in a few words, their mom, who is the co-founder of one of the leading plant-based food brands, is one of the longest-term vegans I know, over 30 years?
Close to 50.
Close to 50, okay. I was way off there. Who has always stood very true to her values, been a very strong leader in what she believes. Do they see you in that way? Is that how they describe you, or are they you just their mom?
I don't know. I mean, they're young adults now. They're 22 and 24. I don't know how they talk about me behind my back. I probably don't want to know. But they definitely know that I lead from the heart, and that I am an animal lover through and through. I was a wildlife photographer for 25 years. They know I'm passionate, I'm committed, I'm tenacious. I don't take no for an answer. I don't back down. And I really have a dichotomy, because I'm an introvert, but I'm also an activist. And so those two things are often fighting against each other. But I find that actually food is activism, and I have learned that through our company. And so I'm able to experience that part of myself that is so important, that resonates with my kids, that activism part, that is just true blue. I can't not be that way. That's just how I'm wired. And so, yeah, food is activism, and they know that about me. And occasionally when they were younger, they'd be like, oh, Mom, they'd have friends over, and I'd be like, have some Hungry Planet burgers. They're not made from animals. And Milo would be like, Mom, enough already. So, you're going to have that with Scarlett. You're going to have that with your own child. But it didn't stop me. It didn't shut me up. But I would just soft pedal it a little bit more. But I like to just cook one meal for everybody. Yeah. I don't like to be in the kitchen that much. I prefer to be hiking and forest bathing and, being in nature and being with animals. That's my happy place. So when I serve people, I just want to serve the same meal that we can all feel happy and nourished to eat, and not cause any harm.
So I'm getting that they would probably describe you as a slightly pushy, Hungry Planet promoting, tree hugging, nature loving, cool mom.
Yes. Precisely.
Exactly.
And I will feed this back to them.
Yeah.
And there will be a
get back
test.
to me, let me know if I'm spot on there.
Nailed it.
Todd, what about you? How would your kids describe you, do you think?
Oh, I can tell you how.
Well, so I thought you were going to give me an opportunity to describe Jody, but
Oh, I'll give you that opportunity. I can't wait to hear.
Oh, no. I'll be out the door.
I have no idea how they would describe me. See, Jody wants to describe me I truly have no idea.
How would they describe him?
Oh, my goodness. They would describe you as somebody that is, you are integrity incarnate. You don't make any decisions that are integral with your values. And it's one of the things that I most admire about you. And we got that from our parents, and our sisters the same way. Like when we get it, when we get committed, we just live it fully. So your kids see you that way. They might not always.
That's good. My brother would not have chosen his words so beautifully. I'd have asked him what he would to describe me.
Well, that's very nice. My goodness.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much both for your time. It's been a great conversation. You know a lot about your stuff, a lot about parenting, a lot about burgers, and a lot about what it truly means to be vegan.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you for listening to Raising Gen V. If you'd like to hear more, please subscribe to this channel. You can also watch videos from this podcast via our YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook channels, details of which can be found in the description. Comments, likes, reviews, and ratings mean the world to my team and I, as do suggestions for future podcast guests and topics for discussion. Remember, children learn more from who you are than from what you teach, so make conscious choices, be curious about the world, be infinitely compassionate, and pave the way for a better tomorrow. See you next time.